Beneath the fractured moon, a single drop of blood traced the curve of her lip like a forbidden oath, sealing the silence of the Forsaken. Ilara's breath fogged the air as the wind clawed at her threadbare cloak, carrying the distant howls of the pack that had once called her kin. The snow-laden peaks of the Ironspine Mountains rose like jagged teeth against the indigo sky, their shadows swallowing the faint glow of torchlight from the valley below. She stumbled forward, her bare feet numb against the frozen earth, each step a betrayal of the life she'd known. Rejection had come not in fury, but in quiet dismissal, a mate's bond severed before it could form, her omega essence deemed too fragile, too tainted by whispers of ancient bloodlines that no one dared name. The alpha of the Silverfang clan, Thorn, had stood before the gathering under the full moon's gaze, his eyes cold as the steel at his belt. "She carries the shadow of the old curse," he had declared, his voice echoing through the torchlit clearing. The pack murmured, their forms shifting uneasily in the firelight, fur rippling beneath human skin. Ilara had knelt there, the weight of their stares like chains, her heart pounding a rhythm of unspoken pleas. But Thorn turned away, his broad shoulders cutting her from his world as if she were a blemish on the moon itself. Banished to the wilds, left to the mercy of the blizzards and the beasts that prowled them. No trial, no defense, only the sting of isolation, sharper than any claw. Now, hours into her exile, the cold seeped into her bones like an unwelcome lover. The wind whipped flurries across her path, stinging her cheeks where tears had frozen into crystalline trails. She clutched the pendant at her throat, a silver locket etched with lunar phases, its surface warm against her chilled skin despite the frost. It was the one heirloom her mother had pressed into her hands before the fever claimed her, whispering of hidden strengths in the blood of omegas like them. "The moon remembers," her mother had said, her voice a rasp against the deathly quiet of their hut. Ilara had believed it then, in the innocence of youth. Now it felt like a cruel jest, the locket's chain a noose around her neck. The forest thickened as she descended into a narrow ravine, pines heavy with ice bending like mourners at a grave. Her legs trembled, exhaustion pulling at her like the tide. She had no provisions, no allies, only the instinct that drove her forward, away from the pack's territory where sentinels might track her scent and finish what Thorn had begun. The air smelled of pine resin and something metallic, underlying the crisp bite of snow. Blood. Her own. Perhaps from the cuts on her palms where she'd clawed at the earth in futile rage during her flight. A low growl rumbled from the shadows ahead, freezing her mid-step. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning the wind's wail. Eyes gleamed in the dimness. Yellow slits amid the underbrush. Not wolf, but something older, hungrier. The beasts of the Ironspine were no mere pack animals. Legend spoke of them as guardians twisted by the moon's wrath, drawn to the scent of the vulnerable. Ilara backed away, her hand instinctively covering the locket, as if its silver could ward off the inevitable. But the growl shifted, deepening into a pained rumble, and a shape emerged, not charging, but collapsing against a snow-dusted boulder. It was a man, or the ruin of one. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a tattered black cloak stained with dark blooms that could only be blood. His hair, raven-dark and matted, fell across a face pale as moonlight, marked by a jagged scar tracing from brow to jaw. He clutched his side, where crimson seeped through fingers gloved in worn leather, and his breath came in ragged gasps that misted the air like smoke from a dying fire. Ilara's omega senses flared, unbidden, a pull toward the wounded, the broken, as if her very blood sang in recognition. Fear warred with curiosity. This was no Silverfang scout, no rival alpha come to claim her as prey. His scent was wrong, laced with something ancient and shadowed, like earth after a storm mingled with the copper tang of eternal night. Vampire, her mind whispered, a word forbidden in the pack's lore. tales of the undying kings who drank from the moon's veins and walked the borders of life and death. He lifted his head, eyes locking onto hers, crimson-flecked silver, burning with a hunger that wasn't mere thirst. "Stay back," he rasped, voice like gravel under boot, but there was no command in it, only weariness etched deeper than his scar. Ilara hesitated, the wind tugging at her cloak as if urging her onward. Yet her feet rooted to the spot, the locket pulsing warmly against her chest, a silent beacon in the gathering dark. The man, king perhaps, by the faded crest on his cloak, a crowned bat amid thorns, slumped further, his blood staining the snow in a spreading rose. She should flee, leave him to the cold's embrace, but the moon hung low, watching, and in its light she saw the flicker of something shared, exile, the weight of unspoken curses. Her hand trembled as she stepped closer, the forbidden pull of empathy overriding the terror in her veins. What strength was there in running from the wounded? Mercy, she thought, might be the only fire left in this frozen night. As she knelt beside him, the wind howled a warning, but the locket gleamed, promising revelations yet to come. Ilara's fingers hovered inches from the stranger's wound, the metallic scent of his blood mingling with the sharp pine of the ravine, thick enough to coat her tongue. The snow beneath her knees soaked through her thin skirts, a chill that mirrored the dread coiling in her gut. He was no ordinary wanderer. The air around him hummed with a darkness that pressed against her omega instincts like a storm cloud, urging her to flee. Yet the locket at her throat warmed again, its silver surface catching the moon's fractured light, as if whispering that this broken form before her was no accident of the wilds. His eyes, those crimson silver pools, narrowed as she drew nearer, a low hiss escaping his lips, not threat, but pain, laced with wariness. "I said stay back," he murmured, his voice a velvet rumble edged with frost, carrying the weight of centuries unspoken. Up close, the scar on his face twisted like a river of old silver, pulling at skin too pale for the living. His cloak, heavy with the emblem of thorns and a shadowed crown, draped over him like a shroud, the fabric torn where claws or blades had sought his end. Vampire. The word echoed in her mind, forbidden fruit from the pack's hushed tales, kings of the night who bartered souls for immortality, their thirst a curse from the moon's jealous heart. She should have run. The wind tugged at her cloak, scattering flurries like scattered warnings, and the distant uivos of unseen beasts reminded her of the iron spine's unforgiving maw. But fear twisted into something sharper, a curiosity born of her own exile's raw edges. What drove a creature like him to bleed out in these forsaken heights? Her hand moved of its own accord, pressing a fold of her cloak against his side to staunch the flow. The warmth of his blood seeped through the cloth, startlingly vital against the cold, and she felt a jolt, a thread of connection snapping taut between them, instinctive as the pull of the tide. He tensed beneath her touch, his gloved hand clamping over hers, not to shove her away but to hold her there, as if anchoring himself against the abyss. "Why?" he breathed, his gaze searching hers, probing the depths of her fear. In that moment, Ilara saw the fracture in him, not the monster of legend, but a king haunted by shadows of his own making. Guilt flickered in those eyes, deep as the ravines that scarred the mountains, a melancholy that mirrored her rejection's sting. He was marked, like her, banished not by pack law, but by the weight of a crown that demanded blood for loyalty. "I couldn't leave you," she whispered, her voice trembling like the branches overhead, the words tasting of truth she hadn't known she carried. The locket pulsed hotter now, its chain a faint burn against her skin, as if the moon itself approved this reckless mercy. Fear still gnawed at her. What if his thirst turned on her, his fangs a quicker death than Thorn's dismissal? Yet curiosity bloomed amid the terror, drawing her in. Who was he, this alpha of the undead, fleeing through snow-choked passes? His scent enveloped her, ancient forests and spilled wine, stirring something primal in her omega blood, a denied bond, rationalized as mere survival's folly. He released her hand slowly, his breath steadying, though pain etched lines deeper into his face. "Foolish girl," he said, but there was no venom, only a weary amusement that softened the scar's cruel line. "You meddle with death itself." His name slipped from him then, unbidden. Draven, King of the Crimson Vale. The title hung in the air like frost smoke, evoking visions of shadowed thrones and betrayals under blood moons. Ilara's heart stuttered. The Crimson Vale was whispered in pack firesides as a realm of eternal twilight, where vampires warred with wolves for the borders of night. He was no mere exile. He carried the ruin of empires on his shoulders. The wind howled louder, carrying the faint crack of branches under approaching weight. Draven's head snapped up, his eyes sharpening to slits of silver fire. "They're coming," he growled, the sound vibrating through her like a shared pulse. Hunters, perhaps, rivals from his shadowed court, or worse, the Silverfang sentinels catching her trail. Ilara's pulse raced, fear surging anew, but beneath it, that instinctive thread pulled tighter, denying the urge to bolt alone. She helped him rise, his arm heavy across her shoulders, his body cool yet unyielding as forged iron. They moved together into the ravine's deepening shadows, the snow muffling their steps, the locket's glow a secret light guiding them. As they pressed on, the connection simmered, unspoken, resisted. She told herself it was pity, nothing more. That her touch was a fleeting warmth in his endless cold. But the moon watched, its light filtering through the pines like silver veins, illuminating the blood trail they left behind. In the silence between their ragged breaths, Ilara felt the first stirrings of something forbidden. Not love, but the raw possibility of it, born from the fear that bound them and the curiosity that dared them forward. The mountains loomed, promising refuge or ruin, and in Draven's guarded gaze, she glimpsed a guilt that echoed her own shame, a king's burden, an Omega's hidden fire. The path narrowed to a cleft in the rock, a hidden alcove veiled by ice-veiled ferns. They slipped inside, the wind's wail fading to a murmur, but the night's threats lingered like echoes. Draven leaned against the stone wall, his wound still seeping, and for a moment their eyes met in the dimness, fear and curiosity weaving a fragile truce. What mercy was this, she wondered, that drew the rejected to the fallen? The locket hummed softly, a promise of bonds yet to be tested. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The alcove's stone walls pressed close, damp with meltwater that dripped like hesitant tears into the pooling shadows below. Ilara's breath came shallow, mingling with Draven's ragged exhales, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and the faint, acrid tang of his blood. The locket at her throat thrummed steadily now, a counterpoint to the distant howls that clawed through the night. Pursuers, relentless as the wind that had driven her from her pack. She eased him down against the jagged rock, his weight a solid anchor in the uncertainty, his cloak spreading like spilled ink across the frost-kissed floor. Draven's eyes, those crimson silver flames, flickered over her face, probing the edges of her resolve. "You should have left me," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that stirred the fine hairs on her arms, cool as the cavern's breath, yet laced with an undercurrent of warmth she couldn't place. Pain etched his features, deepening the scar that mapped his cheek like a river of forgotten wars. But there was no plea in his gaze, only the quiet assessment of one who had long outlived mercy. She tore a strip from her cloak's hem, the fabric whispering as it gave way, and bound it tightly around his wound. The blood soaked through instantly, warm against her chilled fingers, a visceral reminder of the life pulsing beneath his undead pallor. Vampire kings did not bleed easily, the old tales whispered. When they did, it was a sign of deeper fractures, curses unraveling from within. "Why do they hunt you?" she asked, her voice barely above the drip of water, curiosity overriding the fear that still coiled in her belly like a serpent. The alcove felt like a fragile womb, shielding them from the storm outside, but the howls grew nearer, a chorus of fury echoing off the ravine's walls. Silverfang sentinels, perhaps, drawn by her scent, or his, that ancient allure that twisted the air like smoke from a hidden pyre. Ilara's Omega instincts surged, not in submission, but in a fierce protectiveness she hadn't known she possessed, urging her to guard this stranger as if he were kin lost to the wilds. He shifted, wincing, his gloved hand brushing hers in the binding, a touch that sent a spark through her veins, instinctive and denied. "Betrayal," he said simply, the word heavy as the iron chains of old thrones. "My court fractures under the weight of old oaths. A rival, Lord Vesper, seeks the crown, whispering of prophecies that name me cursed, unfit to rule the Vale's eternal dusk." His gaze drifted to the alcove's mouth, where moonlight slanted in like a silver blade, illuminating flecks of quartz in the stone that gleamed like scattered stars. Guilt shadowed his confession, a melancholy depth that mirrored her own exile's ache, the rejection not of flesh, but of purpose. He was no monster unbound. He was a king bound by duty's thorns, his immortality a cage forged in blood and regret. Ilara knelt closer, the cold seeping through her skirts, numbing her knees but sharpening her senses to the rhythm of his unbreathing chest, the subtle rise and fall that defied death's grasp. Empathy bloomed unbidden, weaving through the fear like roots through frozen soil. She had been cast out for her tainted blood, whispers of a forbidden lineage that spoke in tongues the pack feared. Now, tending this fallen king, she felt the echo of that isolation in him, the weight of a crown that isolated as much as it exalted. "And you," he countered softly, his eyes locking onto hers, silver depths pulling at her like the moon's tide. "What sin drives an Omega into these heights? Your scent. It's not of the packs alone. There's shadow in it, old as mine." She hesitated, the locket warming against her skin, its lunar etchings seeming to pulse with her heartbeat. Telling him meant unraveling the fragile armor of her solitude, admitting the shame of Thorn's dismissal, the alpha who had seen her as a curse, not a mate. "Rejection," she echoed, the word tasting of ash on her tongue. "My pack deemed me unworthy, carrying echoes of blood they call forbidden, banished to die in the snows." The confession hung between them, raw and exposed. The wind outside whipping flurries that danced like specters at the alcove's edge. In his gaze, she saw no judgment, only recognition, a shared fracture in the facade of strength. What was power, if not the choice to bear one's wounds? Mercy, she realized, was the true bond, forging links where rejection had severed them. A sudden crack split the night, branches snapping under heavy paws, the howls sharpening to a hunt's frenzy. Draven tensed, rising with a grace that belied his injury, his body shielding hers instinctively as shadows loomed at the cleft. Ilara's heart pounded, fear surging hot through her veins, but she pressed against the wall beside him, her hand finding the dagger she'd scavenged from her flight, small, inadequate, but a declaration of alliance. The pursuers burst into view, 3 figures, cloaked in furs and steel, eyes glowing with feral hunger. Not Silverfang, but Vesper's thralls, vampiric shades twisted by dark rites, their fangs bared in the moonlight, scents reeking of decay and ambition. "Draven!" one snarled, lunging forward, claws extended like scythes. The king met him mid-air, a blur of shadowed fury, his fists cracking bone with the force of centuries' rage. Blood sprayed, dark and viscous, staining the snow red under the moon's indifferent gaze. Ilara moved without thought, her dagger slashing at another's flank, the blade biting deep into furred flesh that howled in surprise. The third circled her, eyes narrowing on the locket that gleamed defiantly. But Draven was there in an instant, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her back as he dispatched the foe with a savage twist. They collapsed together against the stone, breaths heaving, hers ragged, his steadying into silence, the alcove now a battlefield of crimson blooms on white. The howls faded into the distance, routed but not vanquished, leaving only the wind's mournful sigh. Draven's hand lingered on her side. Cool through her cloak, the contact a silent vow amid the aftermath. Fear had bound them in the fight, but now empathy deepened, transforming into a tentative bond, fragile as the ice veiling the entrance. She met his eyes, seeing the guilt there soften, touched by her defiance. The Omega who fought not for glory, but for the wounded soul beside her. Yet doubt whispered in the quiet. Was this connection salvation or snare? The locket burned hotter, a symbol of hidden truths stirring within her, promising that in protecting him, she might unearth her own forbidden strength. The moon watched from above, its light filtering in like a benediction, illuminating the blood that linked them, king and outcast, shadow and light, in a dance of redemption yet unfinished. What price would this bond demand when enemies regrouped under the fractured sky? The alcove's shadows clung like reluctant lovers, the air heavy with the copper reek of spilled blood and the faint, earthy musk of exertion. Ilara's chest heaved, her fingers still curled around the dagger's hilt, its blade slick and warm from the thrall's yielding flesh. The moon's light sliced through the ice-veiled entrance, casting elongated silhouettes that danced across the stone walls, illuminating the crimson streaks marring the snow-dusted floor. Draven stood before her, his form a monolith of shadowed strength, the scar on his face a stark silver thread under the lunar glow. Yet his eyes, those fathomless crimson-silver wells, held not triumph, but a dawning unease, as if the fight had unearthed something buried deeper than bone. She sheathed the dagger at her belt, her hands trembling not from cold, but from the echo of violence that thrummed in her veins like a forbidden song. The locket at her throat burned now, not with the subtle warmth of before, but a fierce heat that spread through her chest, coiling around her heart like vines of silver fire. It had always been a talisman, a whisper from her mother's dying lips, but in this moment, amid the aftermath's hush, it felt alive, pulsing in rhythm with the distant weavos that faded into the wind's mournful dirge. Ilara pressed a palm to it, willing the sensation to ebb, but instead visions flickered at the edges of her sight. Fragments of shadowed thrones, rivers of blood under blood moons, and a figure crowned in thorns, kneeling before a light she could not name. Draven turned to her then, his gloved hand reaching out, not to touch, but to hover, as if sensing the shift in her aura. "What is it?" he murmured, his voice a velvet rasp that cut through the drip of melting ice, laced with the melancholy of one who had witnessed too many awakenings end in ruin. His wound, bound by her makeshift bandage, had ceased its seep, the blood crusting like dried wine on the fabric, but the guilt in his gaze deepened, mirroring the fractures of his fractured realm. He had fought for survival, as she had, yet in protecting her. He glimpsed the weight of his own betrayals, the court he had led to the brink, the oaths stained by his immortal thirst. Mercy had drawn her to him, but now something ancient stirred, pulling at the threads of destiny he had long denied. The locket's heat surged, and Ilara gasped, her knees buckling as she sank against the wall. The world tilted, the alcove expanding into a vast, ethereal chamber in her mind's eye, walls of obsidian veined with moonlight, a throne draped in velvet the color of midnight, and at its foot, a ritual circle etched in silver, humming with power long dormant. Words formed on her tongue, unbidden, flowing from a place deeper than memory. A language forbidden, melodic and sharp as shattered crystal, echoing the moon's silent decrees. Lunare, Vithari solstice, she whispered, the syllables tasting of starlit frost and ancient oaths, her voice resonating off the stone as if the cavern itself answered. Draven froze, his eyes widening to slits of pure silver, the crimson flecks flaring like embers in a gathering storm. He dropped to one knee before her, not in submission, but in reverence born of recognition, his cloak pooling around him like spilled shadows. The scar on his face seemed to pulse, as if the old wound remembered the night it was carved, under a similar moon, in a trial of blood and prophecy. "You're her," he breathed, the words a ragged confession, heavy with the guilt of centuries. The Pathfinder, the one whispered in the Vale's oldest scrolls, the Omega blood that speaks the tongue of the goddess, unraveling curses woven by betrayers like me. His hand extended fully now, palm upturned, not to claim, but to offer allegiance, the leather of his glove creaking softly in the charged silence. Alara's breath caught, the visions receding like tide from shore, leaving her adrift in the alcove's reality. The locket cooled slightly, its lunar phases etched in relief against her skin, a symbol now of the power she had always carried, hidden beneath the pack's rejection. Thorn had sensed it, she realized. The shadow in her blood, the forbidden lineage of those who communed with the moon's secrets, deemed too dangerous for a mate's bond. Banished not for weakness, but for a strength that threatened hierarchies built on fear. Tears pricked her eyes, hot against the chill as the weight of it settled. She was no fragile outcast, but the key to fates entwined, her gift a beacon in the dark. Yet doubt lingered, sharp as the dagger at her side. This manifestation, what price would it exact? The language had flowed from her like breath, but it stirred a hunger in the air, drawing the wind's howl closer, as if the mountains themselves awakened to listen. Draven rose slowly, his presence a cool anchor beside her, the empathy that had bound them in the fight now deepening into awe. He saw her not as prey or pity, but as salvation, the Omega whose words could mend the fractures in his crown, revealing paths through the betrayals of Vesper and the court's unraveling oaths. "Your voice, it calls to the moon's memory," he said, his tone laced with tragic wonder, the melancholy king glimpsing redemption in her eyes. "I have wandered these borders for ages, cursed by my own ambition, spilling blood to hold a throne that devours its own. But you are the revelation I fled." She met his gaze, the instinctive pull now undeniable, resisted no longer by fear's veil. The locket gleamed between them, a bridge of silver light, symbolizing the rebirth stirring in her soul. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the bloodied earth in white forgiveness, while the moon hung fractured yet watchful, its rays filtering in to gild their forms. What was destiny, if not this unveiling? The rejected Omega becoming the whisper that could topple empires or forge new dawns. Empathy had led her here, but revelation bound them, a vow etched in the language of stars and shadows. The howls returned, faint but insistent, circling the ravine like ghosts of unfinished wars. Draven's hand brushed hers, a tentative alliance, as the alcove trembled with the promise of trials yet to come. In her awakening, Alara felt the fire of her hidden strength ignite, illuminating the path ahead, not of blind love, but of choices that could heal the wounds of kings and outcasts alike. The night deepened, the wind carrying whispers of confrontation, and in that suspended breath, she knew her gift was no curse, but the moon's own redemption, waiting to be claimed. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The ravine's shadows thickened as dawn's hesitant gray clawed at the horizon, but the howls persisted, a relentless dirge weaving through the pines like threads of unraveling fate. Alara's fingers intertwined with Draven's for a fleeting moment, the cool leather of his glove a stark contrast to the locket's lingering heat against her skin, before she pulled away, the instinctive bond now a tether she both craved and questioned. The alcove, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage closing in, the drip of meltwater echoing her pounding heart, a rhythm of awakening that demanded action, not retreat. Her gift had stirred, the forbidden language coiling in her throat like smoke, but with it came the ghosts of her past, summoned by the moon's unyielding gaze. Draven rose fluidly, his wound a dull throb he ignored, his crimson-silver eyes scanning the cleft with the predatory focus of one who had danced with death too long. "They come not just for me," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone, laced with the melancholy of foretold ruin. "Your scent draws them too, the silver fang, and Vesper's shadows entwined. The paths converge here, Pathfinder." The title hung between them, heavy as the snow's weight on the branches outside, a revelation that bound her to his fractured throne. Guilt shadowed his features, the scar twisting like a vein of exposed silver, as if his betrayals had finally caught the echo of her own rejection. He had spilled rivers of blood to forge his veil, yet now faced the unraveling of it all, a king's duty clashing with the pull toward her light. Ilara nodded, the locket pulsing in warning, its lunar etchings seeming to shift under her touch, revealing faint runes that glowed with inner fire. Fear gnawed at her edges, not for the fight ahead, but for the choices it would unearth. The pack that had cast her out, the rival alphas whose ambitions mirrored Thorn's cold dismissal. Freedom whispered of flight into the wilds, alone with her newfound voice. Love of standing beside this undead king, forgiving the shadows that haunted him. What was redemption, if not the mercy to choose compassion over the war her blood now itched to unleash? She stepped toward the entrance, the wind whipping her cloak like a banner of defiance, carrying the metallic tang of approaching blood. They emerged into the ravine as one, the snow crunching underfoot like brittle bones, the air alive with the storm's fury. The moon lingered low, fractured by clouds that bled indigo into the paling sky, casting the scene in hues of white gelido and crimson anticipation. Figures crested the ridge above, first the Silverfang sentinels, their furred forms silhouetted against the peaks, eyes glowing amber in the half-light. Thorn led them, his broad frame unyielding as the iron spine itself, the Alpha's gaze locking onto Ilara with a mix of possession and disdain. Beside him slunk Vesper's thralls, pallid and twisted, their lord emerging last, a lithe vampire in robes of deepest scarlet, his face a mask of elegant cruelty, fangs glinting like thorns under the moon. "You dare return, tainted one," Thorn growled, his voice booming across the snowfield, paws shifting to claws as his pack fanned out, encircling the ravine like a noose. The wind howled in response, scattering flurries that stung Ilara's cheeks, evoking the sting of his rejection under the full moon's witness, the quiet banishment that had shattered her world. He saw only the Omega he had discarded, not the Pathfinder whose blood sang with the goddess's tongue. Vesper laughed, a silken sound that slithered through the cold, his eyes, pale as frost, fixing on Draven. "And you, fallen king, cling to this whelp? The prophecies name her poison, the unraveling of your cursed line. Join me, or watch your veil crumble." Draven stepped forward, shielding Ilara with his body, his cloak billowing like wings of night. "The prophecies you twist, Vesper, were born of your ambition," he retorted, his tone edged with the guilt of a ruler who had once trusted such whispers, leading to betrayals that scarred his soul. Blood from his earlier wound scented the air, mingling with the pack's musk and the thrall's decay, a visceral symphony under the moon's indifferent light. The confrontation ignited, claws raking snow into crimson arcs, fangs clashing in bursts of shadow and fury. Thorn lunged at Ilara, his alpha form a blur of steel-gray fur, driven by the shame of his choice, a mate bond denied, now twisted into territorial rage. She dodged, the locket flaring hot as the forbidden words rose unbidden. "Silveraeth, mortis vincula!" The language spilled from her lips, melodic and shattering, weaving through the air like silver threads that bound Thorn mid-leap, his body convulsing as if the moon itself rebuked him. He collapsed to his knees in the snow, eyes wide with recognition and horror, the pack faltering around him. Vesper snarled, directing his thralls forward, but Draven met them with savage grace, his fists a whirlwind that sprayed blood across the white expanse, each strike a atonement for the court's fractures he had allowed. Ilara stood amid the chaos, the wind tearing at her hair, her heart a storm of dilemmas. Thorn rose unsteadily, shifting back to human form, his chest heaving, the Alpha's pride cracked like ice under pressure. "What are you?" he demanded, voice raw with the fear of the unknown, the rejection's echo now reversed, his dismissal birthing her power. Forgiveness tempted her, a mercy that could reclaim her place, offer freedom from exile's bite. Yet war burned in her veins, the urge to unleash the full tide of her gift against those who had deemed her unworthy. Draven fought nearby, his back to her, a king battling not just for his crown, but for the redemption she represented, the Omega who could absolve his guilt if she chose love over the solitude of her voice. Vesper circled, his presence a chill deeper than the snow, whispering temptations. "Claim your throne beside me, girl, or perish with the fallen." The moon fractured further, its light splintering across the bloodied field, illuminating the choice etched in every face, the pack's betrayal, Draven's haunted loyalty, Vesper's serpentine ambition. Ilara's hand closed around the locket, its warmth a compass in the visceral roar, weavos, clashes of flesh, the wet thud of bodies yielding to will. What strength lay in forgiveness if it chained her to the past? Or in war, if it drowned the fragile bond she had forged with the king whose eyes sought hers amid the fray? Thorn extended a hand, trembling, the Alpha's gaze pleading now, a mirror to her own past, pleas ignored. Return. Forgive the pack's fear. But Draven's cry cut through, a thrall's claw raking his side anew as Vesper closed in, the rival's laughter a blade to her resolve. The locket burned, demanding she choose, freedom in solitude, love in alliance, war's fire, or compassion's quiet flame. The snow drank the blood freely now, a canvas of moral fracture, and in that suspended heartbeat, Ilara felt the weight of destinies colliding, the rejected Omega poised to judge kings and betrayers alike, her voice the arbiter under the moon's watchful fracture. The wind wailed a question only she could answer, the night's blood a testament to paths diverging in shadow and light. The snowfield stretched like a vast, blood-veined canvas under the fracturing moon, its light splintering across the fallen forms that littered the ravine, bodies twisted in crimson surrender, the air thick with the iron tang of spilled life and the acrid bite of frost-laced fury. Ilara stood at the epicenter, her breath ragged plumes in the howling wind, the locket at her throat a blazing heart that seared her skin like a brand of unyielding truth. Thorn knelt before her, his alpha form diminished to a man stripped bare by the forbidden words that still echoed in the air, his eyes, once cold steel, now fractured pools of regret and dawning awe. Draven battled mere paces away, a shadowed whirlwind felling Vesper's last thrall with a roar that shook the pines, his cloak torn and bloodied anew, the scar on his face a luminous scar under the lunar gaze. Vesper himself hovered at the ridge's edge, his scarlet robes whipping like flames in the gale, his pale eyes narrowing on Ilara with the hunger of one who saw not a woman, but a key to shatter realms. "The language of the goddess," he hissed, his voice slithering through the chaos like venom through veins. "Wielded by a rejected whelp. Join me, Pathfinder. And we unmake kings together. Thorn's pack, Draven's veil, all bowed to your voice." The temptation coiled around her, a siren's call to power unbound, freedom forged in the fires of war rather than the chains of forgiveness. Her Omega blood thrummed with it, The gift awakened now a tempest begging release, promising dominion over the betrayers who had carved her exile from their fears. But Draven staggered toward her, his side a fresh gash, weeping dark rivulets that steamed against the snow, his crimson-silver eyes locking onto hers with a desperation that pierced deeper than any claw. Guilt etched his every line. The melancholy king who had ruled through centuries of blood oaths, now confronting the ruin of his ambition. The court he had bled for, fracturing under Vesper's whispers because he had failed to see the light in his own shadows. "Alara," he rasped, extending a blood-smeared hand, not in command, but in supplication, the weight of his crown a phantom yoke between them. "Choose not for thrones or vengeance. Choose us." The word hung fragile, a bridge over the abyss of their shared wounds. Her rejection's sting, his immortal isolation, destinies entwined not by fate's decree, but by the mercy that had drawn them from the cold. Thorn rose unsteadily, his hand mirroring Draven's, pleading, raw, the Alpha's voice cracking like ice under boot. "I was blind, Alara. The pack's fear poisoned us. Forgive, return. Be our strength, not our exile." The wind wailed in response, carrying the distant weavos of the Silverfang remnants, a chorus of uncertainty that mirrored the storm in her soul. Compassion warred with the fire in her veins, the locket pulsing like a second heartbeat, its lunar phases glowing with runes that whispered of rebirth over retribution. What was liberty if it meant solitude in the wilds, her voice a solitary echo against the mountains? Or love, if it demanded she heal the very hands that had wounded her? The moon watched, fractured yet eternal, its light gilding the blood at her feet, a symbolic river where sacrifice might flow into union, mending what rejection had torn. Vesper lunged then, a blur of scarlet ambition, his fangs bared in a bid to claim her gift before she could wield it. Alara's lips parted, the forbidden language surging forth unbidden. "Etheris, redempta solis." The words wove through the air like silver lightning, striking Vesper mid-stride, binding him in ethereal chains that forced him to his knees, his form convulsing as the moon's judgment unraveled his twisted oaths. He screamed, a sound swallowed by the gale, his body dissolving into shadows that scattered like ash on the wind, ambition's pyre extinguished by the Pathfinder's light. The thralls fell silent, their decay hastening into the snow, leaving only the pack and the king in the ravaged quiet. Thorn bowed his head, the Alpha's pride yielding to the moral fracture she had forced upon him. "We were wrong," he murmured, the confession a balm too late, yet a step toward the pack's own redemption. Alara turned from him, not in hatred, but in quiet resolve. Forgiveness granted, but freedom chosen beyond his grasp. She crossed the bloodied expanse to Draven, her hand finding his, the cool leather of his glove warming under her touch, as if her omega essence kindled the undead spark within. "I choose you," she whispered, the words a vow etched in the night's visceral hush, her voice steady now, no longer resisted, but embraced. The locket cooled between them, its heat transferring to a shared glow, symbolizing the union born of sacrifice. Her gift offered not as weapon, but as cure, unraveling the curse of his guilt thread by thread. Draven pulled her close, his arms a fortress against the dying wind, his breath, unneeded yet felt, mingling with hers in a rhythm of rebirth. The wound at his side knit under her palm's press, the forbidden language humming softly as it mended flesh and soul alike, drawing out the shadows of his centuries' regrets. No grand throne awaited, only this: 2 exiles forged into one, the vampire king's melancholy lifting like mist under dawn's first blush, her rejection transmuted into destiny's embrace. The moon, whole now in its fracturing, bathed them in silver forgiveness, the snow falling gentle as veils over the bloodied field, a canvas reborn in white, where compassion crowned the fallen. Yet in that union, a deeper truth settled. Love was no reward, but the proof of choices made in the heart's forge, mercy over power, faith over despair, liberty woven with another's hand. The pack dispersed into the peaks, Thorn's gaze lingering with unspoken alliance, the iron spine whispering of paths yet to unfold. Elara leaned into Draven, the wind a soft caress now, carrying the scent of pine and promise. In his eyes, she saw her own reflection, not the outcast, but the redeemer, the pathfinder who had healed a king's wound with her whispered light. The night yielded to a fragile peace, the stars emerging like witnesses to their renascimento, eternal under the moon's benevolent watch. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.